Hello all, welcome to the CPC public meeting of January 14th, 2025. I was just saying as we started up the call, hoping to keep things on a sort of a tight schedule tonight. I am not in the state. I'm out of state on work and have some other events that I need to get to this evening. We will start by doing a quick roll call. And so I'll go in the order I see the CPC members on my screen. Bill, if you would
Bill
introduce yourself.
Kameza, representing Natural Resources.
Thank you very much, Bill. Eve.
Eve Eisenberg, Select Board and appointee.
Thank you. Paul.
Paul Bohm, Recreation Commission appointee.
Thank you. John.
John Kratsley, Select Board appointee.
Ed.
Ed Larner, Housing Authority appointee.
Okay, and Sue.
Sue Felson, Planning Board appointee.
Thanks, Sue. And I'm Burton Flint, Select Board appointee. I don't see any other committee members. We want to. I think we're in a position to close out. Jumping into our first agenda item here. We've got. Let's see. I believe the. I just lost the application that I had the agenda open in. 1 second, but I believe it is to complete discussion on the Thoreau Field application. And I see we've got Dr. Hunter here with us tonight. But I believe, Dr. Hunter, you had sent an email clarifying the amount of the application that the Concord Schools is applying for that application. So I'll give you the floor, and if you want to provide that clarification to the committee, that'd be great.
Sure. And I have the schematic here if you're interested in seeing it again. The revised number is after our consultant spent time. I think this was a few months ago, and I don't think we've done a great job of communicating clearly. So glad to have the chance. The revised total cost of the prospective project is $444,960. And that's based on this final schematic that we did. I can share that if you'd like.
That would be great.
Yeah. Let me just see. Zoom's sending me a little message here that I don't think matters, but so this is the schematic as it's completed. And just to talk through this kind of quickly, we need to, I'm going to just go down order here in the itemized list of costs that have been categorized and are color coded. Removing the gravel here so that we can get that back to lawn with loam and seed. Section 7, we need to thicken those wood chips because it's thin there. 8, we need to clean up and work with the pavement area there. It really needs quite a bit of work. It's a 4-square cord and some other blacktop types of activities. And then 9 is to resurface the basketball court and to make that usable and in better condition. Then if we go to the orange coated, we need to stabilize the slopes in section 6, which I think you heard us mention before. The erosion really is the trouble there. 10A is to loam and seed again. 10B, which might be part of the confusion. We have one play structure in this total that would complement the larger playground project, but we're not asking you to be part of that project. There's a lot of fundraising going on there.
Right.
So if you wanted to lower this number even more, we could get the itemized amount of that and subtract it out. I think we left it in because we're not sure the timing of all of this, and we thought there would be a nice benefit to having something go in from this source, which will, I don't know. I thought it was going to happen first, but they've raised over $300,000 already. So maybe it's all going to happen simultaneously, which would be fantastic. 11 is the community garden that we've talked about relocating right here in the lower section. And then more slope and erosion work. And then 16 is the current Gaga pit and restoring that. It needs updating and, support to it. And then the last blue section is all about leading into this brand new field that we're asking for help with. So that's the big area one here. That would be a soccer field, multi-purpose, but primarily soccer, we think, probably up to U9-ish, not maybe U10. Removing the old playground structure that is there. So that would have a little bit of cost to it, and wood chipping the area. We've got ideas of a fitness trail, perhaps around or next to the soccer field. 10 stations of some kind. And then number 3, this is all more slope, so just stabilizing that. That's a pretty pitched area. Number 4 is the pathway that's eroding, and we've done some Band-Aid kind of work to that. It needs some work. And then 5 is the area closer to the school that also needs just reseeding and loam, etc. So that's the scope of work. Again, we're privately fundraising for the playground, and we have some capital money for the parking expansion. So this is the list that we're asking you to consider, which revised totals with some contingency just for unpredictabilities of $444,960.
This is very clear. And I can see this is all within, I mean, these are all clearly recreation facilities.
Yeah.
Could you just clarify where the playground that's not part of our funding goes? Is that?
Yeah. So that is over here next to the basketball court.
Okay, all right. Got it. Okay. I think for me, you've clarified the question we had. We've got an application amount, which was revised to $444,960. I see the scope of work is clearly defined, written up here. It would be easy to put into the grant agreement. I have one question, then I would turn it over to anybody else's questions.
Sure.
Is with respect to, I mean, I think one of the things that would be the most in demand townwide recreation resources is those playing fields at one. And is there in terms of the school's willingness, I know you've gotten some support from the town soccer groups and things like that, but to make sure that those are available for those if that's part
Yeah,
of
oh, definitely. Both Concord Rec, who does a lot of the scheduling of fields, is highly supportive of this. They're always looking for more space to schedule the youth
Okay.
soccer games and practices. So we're excited to have this opportunity for the community after school. I think the playground is going to be a nice complement to that. You can sort of see families coming for one or both activities, and then the basketball court. And it's just going to be a really family-friendly environment that we think is going to thrive after school and on weekends all summer long. And yes, help to meet the demand for field space that is so needed across town.
Great, thanks. And with that, I will. Thank you very much. I see some hands raised, and I will quickly go through. Actually, Diane, if I could first ask you to introduce yourself as a member of the committee.
I'm sorry, I had trouble with my Wi-Fi. Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee to the CPC. Good. Hi, Laurie. My question is, what is the surface on the basketball court? I should know, and I don't, so I'm just asking a clarifying. Is
Sure,
it
it's
hard? Is it a
blacktop.
hard surface? It's blacktop surface.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it a regulation size basketball court, or is it a?
I don't know the answer to that. My guess is no, based on my anecdotal feedback. It's for young kids to be able to play. I'm not sure the court height, the hoops are even regulation size. We want the
Oh,
kids to be able to reach.
Okay, let's hope they put the hoops down a little bit. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they often do for the little kids.
Okay,
I
thank
can
you.
get more detail to you, but that's
No,
my.
I was just I couldn't remember what I saw, and so it was
Yeah.
just a clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Eve.
Oh, just lost my Zoom. Oh, there we are. In the application, there is an estimated timeline of the playground starting up spring, summer of 2025. That was the privately funded playground, I suppose. And it says lot summer 2025. I'm assuming that that's the publicly funded lot, parking lot you mentioned. And then it says green space, recreational space, spring of 2026. Is it possible that all these things will happen all at once? Like
It could be. I think when we wrote that, we didn't quite know how the timing was going to work and the funding sources coming together. The playground vision got bigger, which actually made us more skeptical that it was going to take longer to raise money. We're pleasantly surprised that that might not be the case. So, you know, we haven't figured out the timing yet. We actually were talking about this because we even got feedback from the playground provider that they don't really think they want to be building a playground over, you know, while driving over a new parking lot. So we're gonna have to coordinate it all, Eve. Once the funding's secured, then we can choreograph all of that.
So do you
Sooner
think
the
all that
better,
might
for
start
sure.
this summer?
It would be really exciting if we could. It would be really exciting if we could. We can't put bids out till we have monies in hand, so that's the trick, but sometimes you can anticipate, put out RFPs, anticipate it. Anyway, we may be able to get creative. So,
Sounds good.
yeah, thanks.
Paul,
Hey, so I don't mean to preempt or jump on the amenities discussion that's going to follow, but where would the amenities, if the public were to use these facilities during non-school hours, where would the bathroom facilities be? Have you thought about porta potties or the public
We
use of
have,
these facilities?
yeah, typically that's what would be available at any of the elementary schools is a porta potty. Often, youth soccer pays for that and puts it on because they have such extensive use after school hours.
Right.
We didn't identify a spot here yet, but I'm sure we will. There's some space probably near the building-ish, near the building, where that newer field will be, but we haven't mapped it out, but I'm sure that's what would likely happen.
No, I agree. That'd probably be a youth soccer
Yeah.
cost, but the siding, you might want to think of in the siding plan where that might be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little pad for it of some kind.
Yeah,
Good point.
thank you.
okay, and I think, oh, Bill, you've got your hand raised.
Just one more question. Lori, what's the total cost of the whole project? I see our part of this, but
Yeah.
what's the total cost?
So we're up over $1 million now. The playground is 600,000, which is unbelievable. But it's going to be exceptional. We have about 200,000 for the parking expansion, and then this 444.
Okay. That's
Yeah, it's turned into a really significant special project.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hunter. I know your time is valuable and I appreciate you coming back to us, I think 3
you're
times on this and for providing this clarification. I'm sorry, Ed, I see your hand just came up. You're on mute. Ed, you're on mute.
I
There we
just
go.
wanted to know what kind of turf will be on the soccer field.
This is grass.
It'll be all grass.
Yeah, this is grass.
Thank you.
Okay, great question, Ed. So thank you very much for your time. And I don't want to take up more of it since we don't have more questions.
I'm going to hang around for the amenities discussion, but the school
Okay.
committee will be your.
Fair
your
enough,
lead.
fair enough.
Okay.
So,
Thank
and as we get to the discussion, and I know you've circulated the worksheet, but if you wanted to go ahead and put into the worksheet that 444 number, that would be great as we get to that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Moving next to our next agenda item, which I will introduce because it's maybe not clear to everybody on the committee what it is. So this is there's some members of the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee reached out to inquire about getting some time in front of the committee with respect to proposing a request, an application for an amenities building at the high school. While I think we have some challenges with respect to where we are in our application and funding cycle, I did want to extend the courtesy of having them make their presentation. Then we can discuss both the timing of the presentation, whether it is appropriate for us to consider it at this time, their request. I don't believe we actually have an application in hand, but I'll turn it over to the applicants and then they can let us know where they are. So, or I should say, not the applicants per se, but the regional school committee. So I think Julie, Alexa, Cynthia, I know, and I know you all represent them. I'll let you take the floor. Julie, I'm not hearing your sound, but you don't appear as muted. So. Sometimes you have to allow your computer under your settings, allow your
Yes,
computer.
Cynthia does look muted actually by what I see.
Can you hear
Burton.
me?
Now
No?
we can hear you, Julie. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm Julie Viola. I'm the chair of the regional school district. I asked Alexa Anderson to join as the vice chair, but also she sits on our campus completion group. We have two other members from that committee, Tracy Morano and Brian Watterson. In full disclosure, I'm a Carlisle resident, and this is a regional school committee, so I am going to probably reference both towns, but I'm fully understanding that this is a Concord meeting. Just wanted to mention that. I didn't want to be presumptuous and do an application, so I really am here just to share kind of our thinking and why we reached out to Burton for consideration for you to look at this somewhat off-cycle project. So we have it as the amenities building, but I just want to also make sure everyone's clear on what it is, because I think what we've learned is the amenities building is fairly ambiguous from a nomenclature standpoint. We are really talking about ADA accessible bathrooms. I will show you where they are on the CCHS campus, but we're really looking for a community use bathroom facility with proximity to a number of tennis courts, the football stadium. This is where games, competitions, and graduation takes place, soccer fields, and other large scale events like the Mighty Moose that comes through, Kicks for Cancer, and other multi-generational community events. So the reason that we're coming to you, this is what I really wanted to spend the time on, and just recap for those of you who haven't been close to this. We completed the high school a little over 10 years ago. The idea was that this would be included then. It wasn't, I don't have the history of the exact reason, but moving forward, we know that there's years-long resident feedback and requests for bathrooms because it is such a high traffic area. Not just for school events. We've covered this at our school committee meeting. Actual school events only take up about 30% of the time in this area. The rest of it is really community use, a lot by youth sports for sure. We also wanted to highlight just the urgency and I'll say imminent liability exposure from an ADA perspective. We do have porta potties that are at the campus, some of them even wider, but we've had complaints that I won't belabor here, but just people who cannot get into them when they have somebody with them. So people who need help getting to the toilet. We also wanted to make sure that everyone's clear just in terms of the alignment with Carlisle. So if you're not aware, Carlisle just opened their CPC applications. We also were in the process of picking a design, which I've put to the right. We had 5 options. We chose the one that really is going to have the longevity. To be honest with you, it's some simplicity. I know it's hard to say that when you see the price tag that you see, but this is going to have something that's a 40 to 50 year lifespan, really is durability and is going to do the trick for what we need. There's nothing too fancy in terms of, this is not a wood structure. This is a cement cinder block type of structure. And our goal is to provide this to the multi-generational use that we expect. And then really, again, just getting back to the ADA part, we really are wanting to be consistent with both the town and school inclusion priorities that we have. So this is not, we don't look at this as a school project only. We really look at this as a community project. For those of you who aren't familiar with the campus, I just want to show you where this is going to sit in terms of the overview. So you can see the main football stadium. That is where graduation takes place, as I mentioned, a number of camps and other things that happen. Tennis courts, number of fields. You can see the BD Center in the bottom right, just to acclimate you and where it will happen. And then in terms of the application and next steps, so to speak, we have looked at the application, the campus completion project team that includes Alexa, who's here. They are ready to submit an application if you were to consider off-cycle, not just for us, but anyone else that were to come through. So we went through the application. We do have all of these things mapped from a feasibility study to the summary, looking at sustainability and a number of things. I also wanted to just put light on the letters of support that we've received from a number of organizations before we've even created a warrant for this year's town meeting to cover the costs that we can't get through CPC funds. And also just to exhaust it, we've looked into fundraising options. We're going to talk about that at our next meeting. We discussed it at our last meeting. We've also we've made asks for ARPA funding. We did not get them. We worked with trying to see if Rec Fund would have any excess to complement the price of this. We're not successful. So we're really looking for CPC. We are going to submit in Carlisle. We are hopeful that we will get something from the Carlisle CPC, and it would just be great to have the support of Concord as well. I went through this fairly fast, but Burton, I want to be mindful of your time again, just because this is our ask to open up a cycle. So I'm happy to share the deck. I shared it with Burton. He can share it with whoever else. But that is it in a nutshell. That is my 5-minute briefing.
Thank you very much, Julie. I appreciate the information and the brevity. And if I could start out just by framing the issue for the consideration of the committee here. Whether or not we want, you think it's a great project or not a great project, or good use of CPC funds or not CPC funds. Where we are obviously in the cycle is we had an application deadline back in the early fall, and there is not a process for extending the application deadline generally, but there is a process for special applications that are essentially out of cycle. And there are criteria that, in addition to the standard criteria for any project we would review, to consider something out of cycle, it needs to meet that criteria. I think that if we were to consider moving this forward, it would not be part of our main article that we would be presenting to town. That it's covering the existing 7 projects that we have applications for. This would be an out-of-cycle application. Then it would be a question of, in fact, whether it was going through as part of regular town meeting or not. If it was part of regular town meeting, we'd have quite a sprint to get to it versus a special town meeting. And I will just quickly run through what those additional criteria are for people who may not be familiar. So as a committee, we obviously operate under the Community Preservation Act, but we also have a set of and then the bylaw, but we also have essentially a set of a procedures manual that we follow. And the special criteria, I may paraphrase a little bit here because in the interest of time. But the first is that the proponents were unaware of the opportunity to undertake the project, or the proponents did not have authority to identify such opportunity prior to the standard application deadline. For example, the potential sale was still confidential, and it references a potential sale because this is generally used in the context of acquiring land or preserving a building in a case where land comes up for sale. Or a building is, might be lost as that would otherwise be suitable for historic preservation. The proponents have either a letter of intent signed by the current property owner of the real property expressing an interest in selling, or an option to purchase the property. The project is supported by 1 or more town boards with responsibility for similar projects. Failure to secure CPC funding will create a high likelihood that the project will not be able to be carried out for the benefit of the town because the opportunity is of very short duration. Appropriation of CPC funding will contribute materially to the likelihood of success for the project, and I should say the project holds a high priority in the comprehensive long-range plan or the open space plan, the historic resources master plan, or in any other planning documents currently accepted and utilized by the town. Point out in that list of bullets, there's not an "and" at the end, but I believe it's the intent that the project would meet all of those criteria listed. And it's probably pretty clear from you reading those out that generally this is intended to address when land becomes available for sale that would otherwise the town would lose the opportunity to purchase if we had to go through the regular application process with an essentially 18-month cycle that the CPC has. So with that framed and making no comments on the project itself, I will go to the committee members with their hands raised. I think the first I saw come up was Eve.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I've been wondering, what is the ask of the CPC, or is it too early to even determine what the budget would be?
So as you can see in the budget, I mean, I think we would be looking for the mid-100,000s as of now. Again, we wanted to first make sure we had the appetite. We're going to apply for, I don't know what the final Alexa for what the ask is in Carlisle, but obviously 25%.
Brian Watterson is the chair of our subcommittee. We met on Monday. He recommended that the ask would be 250,000 to Carlisle. And as such, given that so many things are sort of subject to the enrollment split, we thought therefore that the ask would be about 750,000, given Carlisle's ask of 250.
And then would the rest of the funding come from fundraising, or would that be
It
Yeah, I was gonna say, it would be the warrant article that we would go to town meeting with, but
Okay.
obviously at a lesser rate for the taxpayer.
I gotcha. Okay. Next, Diane.
Thank you very much. The history, and I'm sure Alexa knows this, and I think Laurie does too, is that CC at Play was meant originally to create this. They had kind of said, "Oh yeah, we'll raise the money and we'll create this amenities building," and so all of that was kind of a given. I mean, it in fact in the end it didn't happen, and they either didn't raise the money or didn't see it as a priority. My question for you all is, I've followed as closely as I can, but how much of this is actually, kind of bathrooms and facilities for people who need access, and is it an amenities building in the sense that at one point you were talking about being a place where you could sell some food and do that? Is that part of the plan? I should know this, and I apologize that I don't.
No, we can take the first and then Alexa, if I miss anything. So I think the first piece is CC at Play. I want to be clear. I mean, they did a tremendous amount of work 10 years ago. I think they raised over $5 million in the
I'm
field.
not doubting that. I'm not.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
So no, for sure. I'm just saying, as somebody who's fairly new to the community, it's like really impressive learning, going back and researching. We have engaged them. John came and talked at our last meeting. We are going to engage them for the track. We were hoping to do it for this project. Just the runway is just too short to reopen that. In terms of fundraising, the reason I say that is when you touching on the ADA compliance, we are starting to get more feedback from people around that topic. As more and more events are happening on the campus, there's just more and more of an array of not only abilities, but age groups that are coming through. And I will, again, it's really a delicate feedback piece here, but I mean, we've heard some really heartbreaking stories about people who just cannot get into a porta potty. And you look around, I know Alexa and Tracy last year did a tour of all the surrounding towns, Westford, Lincoln, Sudbury. I mean, every community has something like this at their main campus. So to answer your other question, if we were to show the design, I think I have a quick snapshot of it. The majority of it, I think around 80 to 90% of this is actual bathrooms and sinks.
That's what I thought. I just wanted a clarification of that.
There's a small part where we could sell concessions. Thank you. If we want to, here. We have already asked the builders to see what would happen if we were to shrink that a bit and how much cost we would save. It's not tremendous at all. And so if there's a way for us to do things like sell concessions to make families have a budget neutral investment in athletics or other organizations, not just athletics at the school, like the marching band or not the marching band bands or things like that, then great. That's what we want to provide. But the focus is primarily on bathrooms.
Thank you
Alexa,
so
did I miss
much.
something?
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I have a second question. Is it okay, Burton?
Yes, of course, Diane.
I think it's fairly broadly known that I'm very much in favor of us trying to use these resources that we have, which are rarely have kind of in excess of what we usually have. And so I think when we can do something to support the town with a clear need, it's a prudent thing to do. How we do that with our rules and everything else is for the committee to discuss. But having said that, why is it that we did not receive an application for this last summer? Can you all articulate that? Because I think would help us in our deliberations.
Correct. I'll give you the shortest answer, and then again, Alexa, I know you have more history here. The short answer is we did not get the final numbers for the project until after the deadline. That's the most complete answer. We tried our damnedest to do it. And then I would just say, I know there's been the question of, could you wait a year? I mean, realistically, of course, we can always wait a year, but I will just say that I, as an outsider, seeing the amount of feedback that we've been getting, and just feedback from an ADA perspective, I'm concerned. And putting my Carlisle hat on, I'm actually more concerned for the town of Carlisle than I am for the town of Concord, just candidly, because we don't have the buffer to handle a formal complaint coming through. We just don't. And so that's why I'm going to push this. And I would like to do this with a lessening to the taxpayer whenever possible. And CPC is a path to do that. And that's why I'm here with you all tonight.
Thank you, Julie, so much.
Thanks, Julie. All right, Paul.
Yeah, I think my question was sort of on the short duration. One of the criteria is the likelihood of failure if this wasn't funded in short duration. So help me a little bit with that in terms of the risk, because you mentioned I guess the liability risk. And
Sure.
I think certainly I personally am in favor of this project. The question is, how much do we torture our criteria to kind of pull this in? And you know, I'm in favor of torturing if we can explain it to the public, because
I
we
mean, I
have
think-
these criteria in front of us.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is number one, I appreciate everyone's flexibility. I am aware of that. I think the other part is that even though this is going to be applied to the Concord percentage, I think just the theme of CPC, Carlisle is going to go first. Our town meeting is first for like the first time in a very long time. We are dependent on CPC funds or some kind of offset to, we have some big projects like Concord as well. So I think the biggest thing is lessening it. Alexa, I don't know if you have thoughts if you want to add to it.
Sure. I think, in terms of, I think what you're asking, Paul, is, is a warrant article without an offset to the taxpayer likely to fail? And, our concern again was last year, we did intend to bring a warrant article to town meeting. And the sentiment in some joint meetings with the finance committee and the select board were not to be supportive of that warrant article. And as a result, we pulled it with the intention of creating a more robust feasibility study. And that goes back to the other question of why, in fact, we weren't able to submit on time, because that feasibility study couldn't, in fact, be put in motion till after July 1st in the new sort of budget cycle. It didn't allow us to meet your September deadline. So we would have come to you with a totally incomplete application this year. So I think, it's been made very clear to the school committee that for projects, specifically capital projects, that the select board and the finance committee would like us to see our due diligence and try to find offsets. So we do want to meet that end of the bargain. And as such, here we are.
Great.
Well, and just my concern was not so much for the warrant article. My concern was sort of on a criteria. And I just don't want to open up the floodgates to other applications. I mean, there are a number of people that probably missed the deadline or would have wanted, or things that come up. And, maybe it won't happen for a year or two, but down the road, I don't want to set a precedent here without a really good reason for doing it. So that was my.
No, point noted. And that was something that we brought up to Burton, is that, if there's other groups, we obviously understand that there might be other groups that do this. It's going to create more work. So we obviously don't want this to be a special circumstance just for the schools. We know that it can't be. And so if there are other projects and there is extra funds, like Diane alluded to, that you can deploy to the community to offset the taxpayer burden, we would really appreciate it, as I'm sure others would. And I am truly apologetic if it creates more work. As a fellow public servant, I feel for you.
And just, if I can just add another question, this is a little bit out of the box here, but have you talked to Anthony about sort of workarounds on the financing here? Because, and I mention that because and the public knows that we have unspent funds. So it's not a question of availability of funds. It's a question of when those funds will be available. So is there some way to start this project and carry it forward with with some funding assurance in the future. Burton, I'm not speaking for the committee here. I don't know if we can even do this, but if you need to start the project, the funds were available later.
We run into all the issues around supplanting the funding if that is, we can't fund it. We essentially, the CPC can't fund a project that's already been funded through other town funds, right?
Okay. Right. Okay, thank you. Yep.
Bill.
Wait,
So-
wait, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Bill, I don't mean to be rude. Burton, we do work with the town. If they have some funding and we put our funding together, that collaboration has been, I'm sorry, I don't understand quite the distinction you're making. Is it probably my head cold, which is keeping me from thinking clearly? Go ahead.
Yeah, of course, we often work on project. What we can't do is, let's say something has been planned, authorized out of the general fund, right? And it's being funded with the assumption that we will come back later and sort of take over the funding obligation, because that's the can't say the word, but we cannot replace what would otherwise be general fund funding in that manner. Yes. Bill.
Yeah, I actually, a couple of the questions I had originally, Diane, you asked the same questions, and to some extent, Paul. But here's a question. If we decided we can't take this on this year, what will you do? If we decide we are not able to provide the funding for this year, maybe for next year, but if we can't do it this year, what's your next step?
So as of right now, like I said, we have met with the town manager, we have met with the select board chair. We asked for funding a while ago, in whatever way possible, DEI money, ARPA funding, support for going to the rec fund, and a number of other number of other things. We were not successful with those. And I understand and that's a decision. So we've moved forward with, like I said, fundraising. At this point, it's you guys, you all, and writing the warrant articles. We're going to move forward in Carlisle with that in accompaniment with the CPC. I wish the towns were meshed. I understand why they're not. But that would be one path forward. Now that does not mean that if an anonymous fundraiser came out through either the partnership we have with CC at Play or not, that we couldn't withdraw the warrant article, but given the timing of everything, we're going to move forward. The reason being, number one, community resident feedback from both communities. The second thing is the risk that I believe we have from an ADA compliance standpoint. I never like to balance out litigious things that may or may not happen, but I am just a risk of, I'm not comfortable with the risk that's out there and the feedback that we've received. And we have the support, we believe, this year to move forward with it. I would love to put my fiduciary responsibility hat on and lessen the burden to taxpayers in both towns at the best of my ability. And I feel like we've really turned over every stone from a fundraising standpoint and a funding standpoint. And so that is why we're here. Alexa, did you want to add something? I see your hands up.
I want to say something back first before Alexa speaks. It seems to me, and I've been through some of this before. I used to be a head of a school. I've put in bathrooms. I've faced down the disability concerns, and I know how long that takes sometimes to get through. But I'm surprised. I'm still surprised you couldn't have come to us early in the year and say, "Look, we're thinking about this. We're not ready for the application now, but we're considering this possibility." To give us a heads up. And now I'm surprised that the simpler answer wouldn't be, well, we'll be back next year. We'll come back with a more thorough plan, something similar to, for example, what we saw with the Thoreau school plans. Very elaborate, laid out, specificity put down for us. We see our part in this program. We see how much we're being asked to fund, and we see how much other people are hoping to have funded in other situations. That would be the perfect situation, it seems to me. Instead of forcing us to sort of contort to fix, and to make a decision, which won't necessarily change us this year, but what I'm concerned is the future, when somebody else comes in later and wants to press us hard. It's just a little bit confusing to me why you didn't come in earlier still, at least to ask us questions, and why we're pressing so hard now when you could simply resubmit this again in the fall. So that's my comment.
Thanks. And Bill, just for organization, I think, so you're moving sort of to some
Oh, yeah,
deliberate.
you're right.
I
You're
want to
right.
have a little bit after this as a committee. So if I can, just to sort of keep things on track, Ed, you've had your hand raised and we can. Yep. Ed, you're on mute again. Ed, you're on mute.
Guys here. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think we're getting a little locked into the process problem here of the timing and so forth. My concern is it seems like more money than I remember last year. The middle school we funded just basically a helping of the soccer of the playing field of the new middle school, and we talked about the politics of the whole thing is we want to be supportive of the schools, but we don't want to. We know that there's a pushback from certain people in town. So where do we stand politically with this? I know when it was in the paper a lot about how expensive this thing seemed to be, and how could they possibly spend that amount of money? Is it possible we could take a smaller bite this year?
Are you asking for when we do our application, if you're asking if we could do a smaller amount?
Yeah, it seems $1 million from both Carlisle and Concord is over half of the maximum cost.
So I would say that's an easy yes. And like I said before, we are appreciative of anything. We're in this together. I'm going to pay the taxes in Carlisle. You're going to pay the taxes in Concord. So I think anything will help. That is our goal of coming here, Ed. So I hear you. If the number's not right, we can certainly bring that number down. That is an easy thing to say. Yes, we've appreciated the support in the past. And then just as a note, I'm fairly new to this process. As the leader, if there's missteps or in the process and getting to know the Concord way, my sincere apologies. We certainly could have done a million things. So this is for me. I'm learning still. But my hope is that there is a way to do this. Could we have come and brought more questions? I honestly didn't think of it, Bill and Ed. Yeah, and I'm figuring this out.
Yeah, I did.
Julie, I would say no need to apologize. I
No.
imagine you have your hands full leading the
Sure.
Concord Regional School Committee.
Yeah.
Alexa, you're not a member of the committee, but you had your hand raised if you wanted to weigh in.
Sure, I just wanted to, I think, address some of the other questions. Initially, we had some informal conversations with people, again, more knowledgeable than me regarding the CPC. And last year, when we were pursuing the warrant article initially for this project, we were also concurrently talking about sort of the broader projects that remained on the campus. And again, Julie referenced the discussion of a track. So when we had some informal conversations, it was pointed out to us, again, just sort of to have, so that you all understand why, in fact, we didn't necessarily come sooner. We were told that the CPC would prefer to eventually look at the track versus the bathrooms. And we were even told in some instances that bathrooms could not be funded. And then when we looked further into it, we did ascertain that the bathrooms could in fact be funded, and that there are very specific, I don't want to use the word loopholes, but regulations that outline why in fact they do meet requirements for CPC funding. So I think that contributed to the confusion as well. So we didn't do that additional due diligence in learning that in fact bathrooms could in fact be included in sort of the work that you do until this fall. And again, when we were prompted and encouraged by other town bodies to in fact look for taxpayer offsets. So again, apologies
Sure.
for that.
Great. Thank you for that explanation and some background. Obviously, there's a lot of there's a lot of processes to understand and different stakeholders, which you're obviously very engaged with, and how that plays out. I see no hands raised. So what I'd like to do is just sort of process-wise move us forward a little bit into where I think what I think we need to determine tonight. So we can decide we don't have an application in hand. I don't think what we want to do is essentially reopen our application deadline for all applications because frankly, we would be really hard pressed for time. I think we could reasonably expect applications from different corners. And we don't have a procedure for doing that. And I don't want to come up with some sort of special procedure on the fly. What we could do is consider this as a special application, like I said, that we could attempt to consider if we felt it met the criteria in time for the regular town meeting, keeping in mind that a special town meeting costs something like $50,000 or $75,000 for the town to hold, and I don't think we want to do that for a CPC article. So what I think we want to would be a good outcome for tonight is to get to a decision as to whether we would consider this as essentially an extraordinary application. That's a term I'm going to use because the word extraordinary is in our guidelines. And I'll lay my cards on the table. I think it would be absolutely amazing if we could have this restroom facility constructed at the high school, especially before my daughter graduates in 2 years, because she plays on the softball team, and I watch our athletic director drive lots of people who are disabled down to the fields in his little John Deere tractor vehicle, and I am quite aware that they probably cannot use the restroom facilities, and I wouldn't myself as an able-bodied person. I think it's a great application. The question is as to whether we're under extraordinary circumstances, and strictly looking at the criteria as Bill and Paul were poking at, I don't think this meets the criteria for special circumstances. We'd need to bend or twist or torture them to fit it in there. One thing that I do think is an extraordinary circumstance, it's not covered in our criteria, that Diane touched upon, was that we have a big pot of money that is sitting there. And Diane has heard me say for years, I don't like funding projects that aren't going to be spent down for many years. I've gotten away from doing the multi-year tranches where we say, okay, you've got a big project, we'll fund you a little bit this year, a little bit that year, when we know construction won't happen for 4 years, because these are taxpayer dollars. And inflation and living wage and things like that, it's just in the best interest as I think as stewards to spend the money we have now rather than leaving it in the bank, even though we seem to do pretty well on our interest rate. I would, for all those, that's sort of all the things in my head thinking about it, I would be open to the idea, but I'm not gonna twist any arms to putting this to town meeting to say, hey, we got this application. Oh, the last criteria I would think, because I'm seeing Keith's face at the bottom of my screen, is that we know that the housing groups have already come back and said, hey, you guys have all this money sitting in the bank. Could we change our application and increase it? And we've said, nope, the rules are what the rules are. And we've said no to them. So that, swings me a little bit in the other direction, but I would be open to the idea of standing before town meeting on behalf of this committee and saying, we received this application late in the process, and we are presenting it. It doesn't fit within our rules, but we think there's significant support. And I think if our select board representative was here, she would say yes, there's support, and I bet the FinCom would absolutely say there's support for this. That we could put it forward. What that would mean, I think, logistically, is we'd be signing ourselves up for site visit, and I don't think the weather is going to get any warmer in the next couple of weeks. We would need to get an application. We would need to consider it. We would need to vote on it, and all of that would need to happen by about the end of the first week of February, I think. And Ann, keep me straight on when the warrant closes. Sorry to put you on the spot, Ann, but anyways. I heard a voice. Anyway, the warrant is closing.
Could you repeat that date, please? We couldn't hear you.
I think the warrant closes February 2nd, but
February 2nd. So we'd have a bit of a sprint over 2 weeks. So I'm just throwing that out there. I would be willing to stand in front of town meeting and make the case. Now I'll leave it to the other committee members. I guess let me first ask, just to direct the question, do we have anybody that's a firm no on considering this, or want to make the case for why we shouldn't? Sue, your hand raised. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and be a contrarian. Burton, you listed several issues with if we were to go forward with this, but I think you've left out the most important one, which is that for all time, we would have no grounds for sticking to our current application schedule. When I look at the criteria for extraordinary applications, this doesn't seem to fit any of them. I certainly see the appropriateness of the schools coming to us to ask for funding some portion of the amenities building for bathrooms. That does strike me as a reasonable application to make under CPC guidelines, but I really see absolutely no reason to undercut our procedures and make there be essentially no application deadline anymore, simply because of the unfortunate circumstances that we see here. I guess that's it in a nutshell.
Point made succinctly and well. Paul.
Yeah, I'm really torn on this, because I'm a grandfather of lots of kids, and they're going to use these fields, and I'm really supportive of the project. I got other things going on, as you know, and but I'm with Sue on this in terms of being a bit of we have a process and we have a policy, and while policies are meant to be bent a little bit, this clearly doesn't meet two of the criteria on that. And so explicitly the criteria about without funding, would it fail? No, it would not fail. It would just be delayed, or there'd be alternative funding. And I understand, Alexa, about the so the change of the aim of the applications, and maybe you got some misinformation, but something could have been submitted earlier on this. So I'm just kind of torn, because I'm just supportive of the project. I see it's a real need, and but I don't think we ought to change. And it might even be possible to do. I don't know. We'd have to do this in 2 weeks, and we'd have to have meetings and write the warrant. Just feasibility.
We've got the notification deadlines on the meetings.
Yeah, the feasibility may be beyond us, even if we all want to do it. So I'm kind of leaning towards I'm torn, leaning towards a no on this.
Thank you, Paul. John, love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, yeah, I would. I certainly was moved by what Sue said, and I have felt the same along the way. It's an unusual result of having all this additional monies this year, something that doesn't happen, may never happen again. And it seems to me there are lots of other groups that, including our friends in the housing field, that would like to have access to this money now if this was opened up. It also appears to me that the process was really designed for special housing type situations or lands acquisition situations. But bottom line, I'm reluctant to change our procedures.
Thank you, John.
I think we won't know how to talk to the next group that wants to do it.
Very good. Bill.
Well, I agree with what everyone has said so far. I feel the same way. The one thing I would ask, and Bert, I wonder if this is possible. We could say it's if they still do have some kind of a warrant, or that we would look favorably upon this, we think, at an application next year. But that so you can't give a promise about how much money, but we heard them. We think it falls within in the future would fall within our guidelines, and we would see it as a possibility for the future. I don't know if that could be said or not.
Well, to that point, I'm always hesitant to. I view each year's committee to be a new legislative body. I don't think I'm on the committee next year, for example. But certainly we could say that this year's committee viewed it favorably. And I lose track. I've been on this committee so many years, I don't know when my term ends. Eve.
I hope it's not over, Burton.
I just remember when I signed the thing and I realized it was a 5-year term, Diane. I thought that that John had hoodwinked me when he had me take over his spot, the planning committee spot. Anyway, John, I'm very glad, yeah, you got me that spot. Anyway, Eve.
I I think the argument is being made that it has to be a quick turnaround on this because of the liability issues, upcoming liability issues or potential liability issues. And although I agree that this criteria is clearly meant for land acquisition, and this it does say that the signed purchase and sale agreement of the real property must have already be in control of the owner. We could twist the rules. My problem with this is that $750,000 would be the highest amount of money that we've been asked for this year amongst all of our applicants. And it really kind of throws a wrench into our percentages and what we're supposed to be setting money aside for. Not to mention, I mean, it didn't even occur to me that the open meeting rules that we have to, whoever said that, I don't think this is even possible, right, Burton? If we have to announce meetings at a time and we don't have time enough to do all of that before February 2nd.
I haven't sharpened a pencil on that and done that math yet, but it would be extraordinarily challenging, I think. I mean, we would essentially need to announce the meeting coming out of this meeting, I think, and have it one next week and come up and have an application in advance of that. And yeah, it would be.
It might not be possible at all, but I mean, I think it probably, I'm hoping you all feel that we are friendly to this application when it does come. Hopefully it will come in the summer and plenty of time for this. For our site meetings, and that we'll get a chance to really review a great, robust budget and plan. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Ed.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the one person that's a little bit different because I think this is a wonderful project. For people that are, you know, generally not accommodated as well as they should be. And it's, if we get hung up on the process and you know, we're just dragging our feet a little bit. My only concern is maybe we shouldn't you know, put as much money as they're asking. Maybe we get a lower amount, which is to show that if something is really important, then we can act and let the town meeting people decide for themselves. I don't think we should be in the way of this.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate that. Diane.
Of course, we kind of anticipate what I'm going to say, I think, Burton, and everyone, but I'm very much in favor of this for a variety of reasons. First of all, precedent is always important, and to crash precedent on the rocks of tradition is never prudent. I do think, however, that this is an exceptional circumstance, and I am in fact wooed by the fact that I think the committee not being ours, but the school committee was discouraged from believing that this was something that the CPC could support. And under those circumstances, I think they thought, okay, we're going to have to seek other ways of getting these resources. Under those circumstances, of course, they were reluctant to move forward. I'm sorry that discouragement happened, and I do think that it's often unclear in the town what we can support and what we can't, and how that works. It's not open space. I mean, it is recreation in the broadest sense, but I mean, who knows how that gets interpreted. So on the one hand, I am sympathetic and empathetic to the fact that they thought, well, but this can't be funded. And so there was a reluctance. Number two, I have always believed that rules were made to guide, not to restrict. Rules are meant to, so I'm driving down the road and the 55 miles per hour, but I see ahead of me the fact that I've got to get to the hospital because the person next to me is dying. I'm going to break the 55-mile-an-hour rule and I'm going to fly to the hospital. If I get stopped by the police on the way, I'm going to say, come with me. I mean, I think that rules are meant, they're there for common strictures for all of us, but there are times when we need to kind of crash the rules because we believe that there's a higher principle at stake. So that's the second thing. And what do I mean by a higher principle? I've been trying to raise money for the 250 event. And so I've talked with many, many people in town about please supporting us because boy, do we need it. But one of the things I've heard over and over again is, my God, the taxes are so high right now. The tax burden is so great. This would be a way that we could help to relieve to some degree the tax burden. I was stunned when I heard 750,000. I think that's way too much, given our budget and given everything else. I just think that's out of the question. I think that's for me, I think that's out of the question. But nonetheless, I think anything we can do to mitigate that particular burden in our town right now is responsible, not irresponsible. I think it's important. I think it's a broader principle. It's a higher principle than what the CPC cares about and fights for. So standing on some unusual platforms, I know not the ones that we forwarded tonight, and I respect everyone's perspective. It seems to me that this is the kind of moment in which courageous people say, there are things that are more important than what the obvious apparent rules seem to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Now, I see some other hands raised, but Diane, you've made such an eloquent argument there that what I think would be the appropriate thing to do is, we've heard from each member of the CPC. Bill, I let you speak, correct?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I had one more small thing. This is going to be the opposite direction of where Diane's headed. Just to say it, I just looked it up. I thought we rented them at my own school. You can rent disability accessible, wheelchair accessible toilets.
Okay.
I'm looking at them, so you can have them there for a year or two,
It's
or
a
a
good
year. Less than a
project.
year.
I can get into that, but I was asked not to, so I don't want to go down that
All right,
path.
don't bother. But
Okay.
I mean, a year wouldn't matter. That's my opinion. That's
Okay.
it.
What I'd like to do, Diane, you made that very eloquent statement. My soft running tally was, I'm going to call myself I'm abstaining. We're 5-2, but we each heard the views of the committee. I think that we're on a tight time schedule here.
Right.
I'd like to now go around the room and do a vote of the committee members.
May I make one more quick point? I'm sorry. I don't think we don't have the time to do this. Of course we do. I mean, you just have to have an announcement of a meeting 48 hours in advance.
The warrant actually closes February 19th. That's all I wanted to contribute.
Okay, I mean,
February-
A couple of weeks longer than I think.
we certainly have time. I mean, time is not, I don't think, the constraint. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
The
Thank you.
drafts are due earlier than that.
So that potentially we could get this in. Let me know, but I'd like to take a vote as to whether we would want to consider this. For to be very clear, it's not whether we would voting on the merits of it, but whether we want to attempt to consider this as a out of cycle extraordinary application that we would include in this year's regular town meeting warrant. So with that, I will ask for a vote, and I'm just going in the order you're appearing on my screen. Bill.
No, I don't want to consider it.
Okay. Eve.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Paul.
No.
Okay. Ed.
Yes.
Sue.
No.
John.
No, not as a special application process under our regulations.
Okay. Diane.
Muted.
Diane?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I really
you, Burton.
Do you
wish,
call
right?
Ed?
Right.
Yeah.
No. Oh,
yes.
Ed, I did call on Ed.
You did.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What I was really hoping is that we had a full committee here. So,
4 to 3.
yeah, because I would be open to considering this, which puts it at 4-4. And so, oh, Paul, you've got your hand raised?
I just wanted to make an observation. So we've talked to, I guess Ann Clifford has talked to Stuart Saganor about how we would handle some of the unspent money. Diane, I agree with you. It's a really important project. I dispute the urgency of the project. We can make it clear that we're going to fund this project in the future by putting it in an appropriate reserve account, which means we don't commit it, and it's not in the warrant article, but we can put it in a reserve account, whether we call it open space or recreation, or I think Stuart mentioned sort of a special reserve account. We could do that just to show the intent that it's a valuable project. I think the committee should go on record that this is a valuable project and it's fundable, it should be funded. It's a question of timing, and it's the urgency of this project, which I think it's not quite there.
Yeah.
Just want to add that.
Yeah, Paul, that's a really good that's a really good middle path. You take okay, so essentially I think I would request the applicants to if there had been the support of the committee to go ahead and submit an application, and we would jump into high gear. We're split on this, and so at this point I think that there's not the support to move forward with the application along the process that I was just describing. We're short one member. We're a 9-member committee, but we're split at 4-4 on a vote. Any other committee members' thoughts or direction? And Alexa, I see your hand raised, but
Can you review the vote? I'm confused.
we had Bill as a yes, Eve as a no, Ed as a yes.
No,
No, you have
Yes.
reverse.
No, I think
You
not.
got it backwards, Burton.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Eve
Bill
is
is
a
a no.
yes. Eve is a yes.
Eve is a yes.
Diane is a yes. Ed is a yes.
Burton,
Bill is a no. Susan is a no. Sue and John is a no. Paul was a, Paul, what did you vote?
I was a no.
Oh, he was a no. Okay, and Burton, even if you were a yes, it's still tied. You're right.
Yeah. All right. Paul's point. So I can't emphasize enough that I think that this committee, well, at least the sense of people who spoke specifically to the merits of the application, seems to think this is a good use. And I will say, having heard a little bit from the select board, I haven't discussed this specifically with members of the FinCom, and their support. And I bet that the taxpayers of Concord, generally standing up in front of town meeting, would be in support of taking this money that's otherwise sitting in a pot and taking it off, taking it out of a the increase that the regional school committee might otherwise have to seek. And having just seen, I think FinCom came out with their numbers, what they're looking for. I'm sure you can't fit a facilities building into that, the increase that they want to hold you to. So I think that there's a strong support for this. It's just a matter of, we've got to treat all applicants equally who are coming before us. And while it may sound like we're getting caught up in procedures, I think the people that made that argument, in good faith, we've got to treat other people, again, looking to the housing folks and things like that would have certainly liked to have come back and gotten a second bite of the apple, with a desperate need for more funding for housing. I think would want to be treated the same way. So with that, maybe we could talk a little bit about what Paul was touching on, which was some direction we've gotten lately from the Community Preservation Coalition around how we should be setting money aside in the future. And there was this category, Paul, I think you've read these materials a lot better than I, around that it should be designated into reserve funds for current spending, which is not the way we've done it. We've always, or for that fiscal year. But do you want to speak to that a little bit and maybe expand on your idea of whether we lump this all into a larger reserve around recreation, which we haven't done previously?
And I also see,
Well,
Eve's hand up. I don't mean to be rude. Go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry.
I can talk to the spirit of the communication, the literal, what the question was, since we had unspent money, what do we do with it? Do we show it, put it in reserve? Do we show it unspent? Do we have to show it at all? And I think Anne spoke with Stuart Saganor, and there's a category where we actually put money in reserve for undesignated projects. We wouldn't name this project, we wouldn't call it anything. It would have its own category, because remember, the categories that we can put reserves in are open space, historical, and housing. Those are the only three categories we can put reserve, but there is another category, which Stuart says kind of unspecified reserve. And I don't think you can specify this project of these, but we could put it in there. So I'm trying to find a way of showing the intention here, but it doesn't satisfy the need to get this done quickly. But it does
No.
satisfy the need to show that that we support the project and the money is there to support it the next cycle. I'm not sure it helps, but that's what I know.
Thank you, Paul, for that. Yeah, we've been getting a lot of information from Stuart as of late. Some of it's is a little hard to figure out what we need to implement. Eve.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to ask, well, actually, I want to make a comment that I'm not sure how a project or an applicant would know that they fit the special application process. And I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that if an application didn't meet our deadline and it was going to try to interject, they would have to apply at some point just to submit an application. And I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for this group to submit an application and make the argument that they do meet this criteria and just put the burden on them to apply and to try to fit themselves into the special application process or make that argument. I don't know that it's too much for trouble if it's actually a February 19th deadline, to have an extra meeting for this committee to look at that. And if it looks like they didn't meet the burden of being a special applicant, then that's the end of that. They can try again next year. But if they do, then I think we're kind of off the hook if we feel like they have met the process. Does that make sense?
Eve, it makes a whole lot of sense. I wish you'd, I had that thought when I spoke with Julie and Alexa a couple of weeks ago. I did request that they go ahead and prepare an application and submit it, but not speaking necessarily directly to well, I pointed out the special application criteria. I certainly wouldn't argue that they shouldn't do that. Can I ask when our next meeting is? Do we have anything between now and February 19th? I think we've got one final one probably to finalize the
Oh, it looks like
Yeah,
February
did you-
4th is our next meeting.
And the draft warrant articles are due the 5th.
the 5th.
Oh,
Mercy. Those are the draft warrant articles that are due. That's a sort of an internal, I mean, well, I don't know. Talk about procedures. I don't know if that's a hard internal deadline or not. The warrant closes on the 19th, I guess is the case.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, Eve, I think it would, what the benefit would be, right, that we see the criteria with maybe a response to each particular one, right? But I'm not so sure. I mean, to me, and the criteria, I think we've had folks have made the argument that they're with at least 3 of the criteria that maybe that we don't have those things present. So I'm not sure if that's worth the fire drill. Sue.
Excuse me. I wanted to follow on to Paul's suggestion, which I'm sympathetic with, although it does strike me as a little bit difficult because we would have to pick a dollar value to put into some sort of reserve fund. And then if we were to pick a high value such as that which is requested, well, some people on the committee have already expressed their discomfort with so high a figure, and I feel the same way. But on the other hand, if we were to pick a much lower dollar value, it would kind of set up an expectation in advance that that is the amount that we were supporting. And I don't mean to say we shouldn't do this. I just wanted to throw that out there as a couple of difficulties with picking some kind of number. And then to respond to Eve's point, I did kind of feel that we just went over the extraordinary criteria, and most of the members of the committee either said, well, it doesn't meet them, or and therefore they're against it again for this year as an extraordinary proposal, or it doesn't meet them, but they're in favor of breaking the rules anyhow. So of course, the potential applicants are in their right to submit the application to us, but it seems like a lot of effort to go to for dubious outcome.
Thanks, Sue. Well put. All right, Bill?
Julie, I have a question for, really for you, Julie. Do you think you're going to be able to, assuming that our position stays the way it is at the moment, are you going to go through with a warrant for a town meeting to try to get funding for this no matter what?
We are gonna put the warrant forward no matter what. If we feel like it's in our best interest to hold off and, submit applications for CPC over the summertime, yes, we're probably gonna consult with a number of other, I'll say committees. But the intention is to move forward based on the feedback, the number of complaints that we've received. And just again, the desire from a taxpayer standpoint and resident that they want this building. The ask, of course, has always been, and it's hard. I really empathize with all of you because you are the last people that I am talking to. I've asked other folks in town, and I don't want you to shoulder the burden of saying no. But the ask, again, we're elected officials. We were asked to pursue this, not across the board. There are definitely some people that would like us to wait. So my job as the chair is to make sure that everyone is on board with moving forward, or at least the majority. And that's what I will do. I know I personally had some hesitancies when we went through all 5 decisions. I'm comfortable with the third one that we've had. Again, putting my Carlisle taxpayer hat on. One of the things that I want to make sure we're comfortable with is the risk that is outstanding. And I hear what you're saying from your own personal experience. I have the privilege and the burden of seeing the latest view. And that's what I need to figure out. I would just say, I think in terms of moving forward, I appreciate the support of trying to earmark funds. I leave that to you all. We will follow the process now that we understand the rules. As Diane mentioned, we were deferred. We were kind of taken aback earlier. It is what it is. I'm all about moving forward. I'm going to let you figure that out. We can certainly follow the process. We hear the feedback on the dollar amount. We will lessen it, whether we apply this week and just put it in for you to consider, or if we submit it this summer.
Well, let me make some comments.
You're going to move forward with the warrant.
Oh, you already moved forward. So Julie, I don't think personally, I could be wrong and the committee may disagree. I'm not sure that in the future, the dollar amount is out of line, say in next year's application process. That's one thing to consider. Second thing, I think generally, most of us, all of us favor this. So you should know that. And I'm wondering, Bert, if there's some statement we can make at town meeting to say, look, this came too late for us. We couldn't consider it. We will consider it. And we took a vote of the committee, and the committee is overwhelmingly in favor of some funding from the Community Preservation Committee, but we don't know the amount yet, and we don't, we couldn't process it until the application comes through in the standard way.
But as Burton said, they can't build the building and then retroactively ask us for the money for it. This is the difficulty.
But I think
Right.
maybe Bill's speaking to the situation where Julie is going to town and asking for something out of the general fund, which is a portion of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Alluding probably directly referring to the fact that they would be seeking additional funding from CPC and other sources. And, we would have a vote on this, but I don't think it would be untoward for the CPC to speak in favor of it based upon a vote of this committee that the sense of the committee was that it was an appropriate project for CPC.
And that's why I say, I don't want you to shoulder the no. I think what I struggle with is the feedback that I've gotten in other meetings across the town is like, why aren't you raising, student athletic fund costs, or why aren't you increasing these fees? Well, why are we going to increase those fees? Like, I'd rather figure out a way to lower these bigger projects to you know what I'm saying? Like, I that's what I don't like is trying to figure out these bigger projects and offsetting the cost. So I hear you on the rules. I get them. I think what Eve and Burton and Diane referenced about the extraordinary circumstance might be something that is not in your bylaws. Maybe you consider it for a future project, if you can't bend for me. But I think having excess funds that you could use to offset taxpayer burden, that is an extraordinary circumstance, especially in 2025 with all the feedback that we're hearing and around affordability in both Carlisle and Concord. That would be what I would consider extraordinary, because again, the privilege and the burden that I have is the view that we see from a socioeconomic diversity standpoint in both communities is concerning, very concerning. And so that's why I look at this as something that is extraordinary, even if it's not written word for word in some of the Puritan bylaws that we have. That's what I struggle with, and that is why I wanted to bring this forth. But again, you're the last people. I don't want you to shoulder all of it. There's been a number of other people, but that is what I hear, not just from, school-aged parents and things like that, all community members, is like, this is getting really expensive. I've seen your tax increases. I know my own here in Carlisle, like, it's extraordinary. That is the word. But again, I'm not overseeing the bylaws. I understand the pressures you're under. I operate in similar rules. I get it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you again. Really, really and truly.
Julie, thank you for your time. I'm glad we got to have this conversation. Thank you for the committee's input and on this issue. I think in the interest of time, and that I'm gonna have to get dinner sometime here in Wisconsin before all the restaurants close, which is pretty early in Wisconsin. I'm gonna ask that we move on to our next item, which is
Wisconsin and food. We had to call and order in right now. Do they order it in Wisconsin? Do they have such things?
I don't know.
They must have a horse and buggy that can bring it to you. Oh, wait.
I'm sure you can get some cheese.
I'm in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. Oconoma. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Anyway, I'm not sure they have delivery here. So with that, Julie, thank you for your time. I think what we need to move now to, we do need to finalize formally the funding levels for the applications we've received. I believe we have a worksheet from Anne. Anne, I would ask you to throw it up on the screen so we can look at it and go through it and have a formal vote. We have previously voted.
We already voted on all of these except for the school. So I think you're almost done.
Yeah, we're essentially done. So now we've got this up with the new lower number, which was adjusted at item C for 444,960. And that brings our total down to is that not the number 1,554,388? And feel free to speak up and walk us through this.
Burton, can I just make a point here? I think I raised it in an email. We are setting aside a reserve fund for historical preservation because we have to hit the 10%. We are not funding any open space projects per se. And we're funding 2 recreation projects. Do we need to set aside reserve explicitly for open space?
Okay, so that's a good question. So this is a little bit of a breakdown of how we categorize things, the distinction between how we categorize things and how the Community Preservation Act categorizes things, right, Paul? Right. So the Community Preservation Act says we need 10% in each of the following 3 categories: community housing, historic preservation, and open space. We then have this 4th quasi category, which we lump with open space, which is recreation and open space. In my mind, while we call projects recreation, they are part of the open space category. Are you thinking that recreation is for purposes of the act doesn't satisfy recreation spending, does not satisfy the open space minimum criteria?
Well, the way I interpret this, there are 4 categories. Recreation is its own category, but it doesn't require the 10%. There are 3 categories that require 10%: open space, housing, and historical preservation. The CPA, you find it is a separate category for recreation, but it doesn't require a reserve.
Oh, I see.
The separate criteria, the separate stipulations for recreation that are different from open space. But the difference is we historically have done open space / recreation categorization. And maybe that's what we want to do here. But
well, but if if the act says we need to set aside 10%, a minimum of 10% for open space, just like it does for historic preservation, for example, then and it's got a separate category for recreation without a minimum spend, then it seems pretty clear to me that we do need to have a set aside for open space.
That's how I read it, but that's what I wanted to discuss here.
Let me, maybe I'll ask some of our former chairs just because I haven't gotten back and looked at the act, but Diane, John, do you, yes? Diane?
Yeah, it's been my experience that we do have to set aside a certain amount of money for each of the categories, Burton, and I think this is certainly I mean, Paul's comment, I think from my perspective is pertinent. So I don't think it causes any harm, and I think it does remind us on a regular basis of our commitment to all three categories. I would just ask one more question. May I ask one more quick question? I want you to get dinner, but I'm gonna ask one more quick question. And that is that one of the things that concerns me is that our deadline is, I'm sorry, I've got such a cold. Our deadline is so early. And I think one of the things I'm trying to think of if I were an organization, I was trying to figure out a way to apply for CPC funding. I know we're habitually, we do it the way we do it, and we have it early in September that there's the deadline, and then we go off and we do site visits, and then we adjudicate. But I feel like we're putting a lot of pressure on organizations. I'm so curious why Carlisle's application deadline is so much different and so much later. So I would hope that in the long term, we would review our kind of categories and our kind of rules. Because I'm not sure that they serve the community as well as they might. But that's just something I wish we'd put on the record as something we need to observe. That's all.
I want to say I support Paul's notion about putting money into open space. I think that's essential. I think it's a key area.
Yep, totally.
Bill, if I just have a.
Yep.
And it's the 10% number, which we know already. That is.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And maybe it's my Wi-Fi that just got a little specific point on the 10%.
Was that a question? Sorry.
I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi is breaking up.
Yes. I think we agree. We just need a row that has open space reserve and put 10% in that row.
Yeah.
Just like we do with historical. That's what we do.
Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So I was starting to break up there. Okay, so Anne, can you update this your worksheet? And if you could keep it on the screen, please. Update your worksheet to reflect a 10% open space designation, which I think should be the same as that 189. 185,928, I guess, same number that would need to be for open space.
Right.
Sure.
That's not right.
Yeah, I mean,
you're actually not required to do the 10%. I mean, I'd never say don't put it there, but you're not required that recreation is actually a subset of open space.
But Ann, I think it's a good thing to do, put it in open space.
Oh, certainly, I do too.
Wait, but that was the whole discussion, Ann, we just had, which was that the categories that you were required to put 10% to are open space, community housing, and historic preservation. You're saying recreation spending satisfies open space?
It does. I checked with Stuart.
Okay.
It always has, and it's always been a source of discussion with this committee historically. And Paul, that's the reason I supported your comment, but it really is under that category, under that rubric. So I think that even I took a seminar this summer that would confirm that. So
okay.
Well, then maybe never mind. But
yeah, I mean, so
it's confusing because there are there are 4 categories that are listed in CPA and they have their own criteria, and we have it in our procedure. But there's some lumping, I guess, of open space and recreation in that 10%. I don't know. I'll say no more here because I'm not helping.
Okay, I guess, and not to really put you on the spot, but you're highly confident of that.
Yes.
Okay.
And I
Well,
think
in
Keith
my
had
view,
something to
I
say.
just
May-
say, my view is that I don't like to tie the hands of future committees to the beyond what's really necessary. And whether it's put into open space reserve or general reserve, I'd like the future committee to have as much flexibility as possible. So I would not support earmarking it specifically except to the extent required by the law. And if it's not required by the law, I'd say leave it in the general fund. It could be used for housing, for example, and that would be lovely. So I would not be in favor of that. So
Okay, so Bert, why don't we make
this,
C and D open space / recreation, just as a category, like we've done in the past, so there's no confusion there.
C and D,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
we've done
open
that in the
space
past.
recre- yeah.
We've kind of lumped them together. We might as well lump the category.
Did the applications, the only question was the applications probably weren't open. Well, in the past, we haven't necessarily reflected exactly what the application said.
Right.
Does anybody object to doing that for purposes of our bookkeeping, that they'd be reflected as open space recreation, is essentially so that we can track that these were meeting the open space requirements of the CPA?
I think that distinction is really important because we've had this discussion often, Burton, and gotten a bit hung up on it. So I think
Yeah.
that the conflating those two because they are, I mean, I think is really important. So thank you.
So you're in favor of saying open space / recreation?
I am. I was supporting Paul because I think recreation in the town is a high need and important, but if we can put the two together, we get into a less,
Okay.
I just think it minimizes the long-term confusion. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So Anne, if you can make that change.
So actually,
And with that,
can I say something? It actually does add.
anytime, please weigh in when you have valuable information to provide.
Yes, okay. So it actually, the Community Preservation Coalition wants you to choose between recreation and open space, and so when you split the categories, that doubles the amount of record keeping that it takes. There are 2 separate accounts then, and these are really very clearly recreation projects, and they're not open space. I think sometimes you split them when they're primarily open space, but you also want to sort of diplomatically call them recreation.
Yeah,
But
I'm just going to
that's
say,
not a best practice.
I'm just going to say, right, we seem to be getting some conflicting information from the Community Preservation Coalition. What I want to be keeping records of here is that we were meeting the 10% requirement by the law. And I don't know who's got the double bookkeeping obligation or double record keeping obligation. Is that the coalition, or is that you, Ann?
Right, that's the town. So when you categorize a particular project as open space and recreation, they split that down the middle and create 2 separate accounts. And then, so that doubles the amount of work and
okay, but the last time you provided.
Sorry, are you breaking up?
Yeah,
I don't mean to be discourteous, and I'm just going to jump ahead of the queue. I think that's somewhat irrelevant. We can deal with that by talking to the town and by talking with Anthony and others who do that bookkeeping.
Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in too. I was going to suggest, why are we arguing this now? Why don't we just go with what we have had for now? Figure this, end this conversation on this one, and then work out this discussion next year or as we move forward about open space versus recreation. Let's not make any changes now. That's my opinion. I'm sorry I jumped ahead too, Eva.
Okay, I'm jumping ahead. And all I was going to say is, I'm jumping. This gray bar that says recreation on it, the gray bar that's just the title of those projects could say recreation and open space. And then you'll know that the open space made its 10%, but those two projects are considered recreation.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Gorgeous.
I find it frustrating that we are treating a recreation and open space as one thing for purposes of meeting the 10%, but two things for purposes of bookkeeping. And I'll leave it at that, but I find that highly annoying. Let's do a vote on this. I think, you know, we're not seeing the whole spreadsheet here, but essentially what we're voting on is 444,960 for the schools. And with that, we are, and excuse me, the Historic Preservation Fund set aside of an additional $103,928. And with that, then we would be essentially setting the funding amounts in the warrant article. With that, I will, may I ask for a vote on that?
I move that we accept this as it is, this budget.
Thank you very much.
Second.
Bill, may I get a second. We got that from Eve. All right. I will now go to my just going around. Eve, you're first.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
I think, sorry, Zoom is making this hard for me. Diane.
Yes.
Paul.
Yes, with apologies for sidetracking us.
That's great, Paul.
Very insightful, Paul. Thank you. John.
Yes.
Ed.
Yes.
Sue.
Aye.
And I'm a yes. Great. We have unanimously, just missing one member, unanimously approved the funding amounts across all the various categories. So thank you very much for that. I'm just going to go to our next agenda item, which is, well, we didn't discuss reserve allocations, really in depth. Quickly state that we had gotten some feedback from the Community Preservation Coalition that suggested that we needed to put funds that remained available, but that were not specifically allocated to projects into a undesignated reserve. And I think we've just done that by default. Monies that weren't spent were reserved by the town previously as being available in future years. Paul, you weighed in with some really good points. Essentially, if I may boil down to why change the way we've been doing it? The way we've been doing it has worked in the past. Is that fair?
Yeah, and if we had a separate row that says undesignated reserves, 1 point something million, that would be part of the warrant, and we'd be asking the town to actually approve that. Do we want to do that? But it's really unspent.
It would be interesting to put that to a vote, which is they didn't want to have them as undesignated reserves, or I'm not sure what the point of voting on that would be, why it would be part of the warrant. It's essentially money that is not being appropriated in the current cycle, and so I'm not sure why that's being voted on, unless the idea is that you put it on the warrant and somebody could come along and say, I want to move that from undesignated reserves to a different category, because I guess the total value of the warrant would include the undesignated reserves.
I'm just saying, let's keep it the way we're doing it. Unspent reserves unspent funds is effectively undesignated reserves, right? We know that.
That's my view. Yeah. Does anybody disagree with that?
Well,
okay.
Stuart Saganor can come and explain the difference, because there actually is a difference. And with the budgeted reserves, if there were extraordinary circumstances where, land did become available and you did want to access the funds, if they were just left and not in a budgeted reserve, you may not have access to them. He said that access to those funds would close between usually, I think he said November, when the town sets its tax rate, and July 30th and the following year. So there's a block of time where those funds are not available if you just leave them as you have been. and it's worked okay. And typically you wouldn't need them, but if you ever did want to access them, you could if they were in budgeted reserves. And of course, if you had the recommendation and if there was a vote at special town meeting.
Okay, so let's walk through that. You said from November until July, those would be in a lockbox for some reason. Even if the town took action through a special town meeting to appropriate them in the interim.
That's what Stuart Saganor said, and he did offer to come in to explain it because he understands it through and through, and I really don't.
So is it just semantics, Anne, or do we have to
No, it's not
disclose it?
semantics.
Excuse me?
It's not semantics.
No, I'm saying, would we have to actually include that in the warrant? At a row, that's what I meant.
Yes, you would.
Then it seems like we ought to do that, because if somebody came along with an extraordinary proposal for land acquisition or whatever other thing that matched the criteria, we ought to make it possible for the town to do that. What would be the downside to doing it, if any?
Time? Do we have the time to do this, to have him in?
Well, one issue could be, as seasoned members of the committee know, when you go to town meeting, you can amend the warrant. You cannot increase the amount of funding under the warrant. You can decrease it, but you could, under the amount of funds under that warrant, you could redesignate funds by amendment. If you have a warrant article that includes some large bucket of undesignated reserves, I could imagine somebody could come forward and say, hey, let's move that from undesignated reserves to this other project that I really like.
Yeah.
Well, but wouldn't the town moderator declare it outside the four corners of the article if, for example, they came up with some new project no one had ever heard of before and moved that we should spend it to, buy recreational penguins or something like that?
I don't know. That would be.
Penguins.
I mean, having read the warrant, would not imagine that we could take this money in the reserve fund and designate it for Arctic
that would be a
wildfowl.
question for Carmen, but I've seen some interesting twists and turns at town meeting. I don't know. We've not considered this before. This is sort of late breaking news. It would be a change in practice. We do get valuable insights and information from Stuart Sagamore. He is not necessarily. I mean, he's a little bit of a wizard behind the wizard behind the wall. But I mean, it would be a shame if we were somehow told we couldn't access these funds in the need of a truly, extraordinary circumstances that we just had so much discussion on tonight. But this has never been an issue before. Diane?
I'm going to defer to Keith, because who knows this stuff, I think, as well as Stuart does in so many ways. It seems to me if we have an issue like this, but we have another meeting, we have time to discuss this and figure out how we're going to do it. It's not necessarily part of the warrant. It's more of a keeping situation. So
Well, it would be part of the warrant.
It would have to be part of the warrant.
Yeah, I think this is designating it specifically as part of the warrant. So we'd have the various things that we just voted on that get us to 1.5 or whatever that was.
And we'd have to indicate designated reserve.
And then we would have undesignated reserves, and somehow that then tags the money in a special category such that it could be tapped into within that fiscal year.
Got you. Okay, I defer to Keith.
Okay. You mean Stuart?
No, I mean Keith Bergman, who's been a town manager and worked with the CPC.
Okay. Keith, do you have special insight on this?
Yeah, I do. I think that this is why we have town council. And I think that you need to, and this is why motions are reviewed by town council or will be before the warrant closes. I think you have two questions to ask. First is, do you need to appropriate, do you need to put all of the projected revenues for fiscal 2026 into a series of appropriations that add up to those total revenues? And if so, then you would at least need an undesignated reserve fund balance. More specifically, though, I am not aware that the Community Preservation Act has been amended since I retired just a few years ago. But open space is not recreation. Open space is open space, and town council. And you're admitting that you've got two projects which are recreation and not open space. I don't see how with a straight face you can say that those satisfy a requirement of the law that 10% of the funds be set aside for open space. So I, for one, think that you should ask town council's opinion on whether you need a reserve fund for open space, because I think you do. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Keith, on both of those points. I will tell you, I feel like we've looked at this in years past, and I can't keep it straight. It's like when you forget somebody's name the first time, and then you can never get it right.
I remember it. I love it.
Because I can tell you definitively that there is some conflation of those categories in the act, which Paul was touching on. And what I think that means is, I think it would be prudent before our February, I think you said 4th meeting, that we get a read on whether it is appropriate to have an undesignated reserve to provide us maximum flexibility, or whether that's unnecessary under the act. I do trust town council on that, and also with respect to whether we need the open space reserve. Keith, I think that both of those points are excellent, and saves us a lot of spinning of our wheels. Thank you. I know this is a committee discussion, but Keith, of course, you bring some good valuable discussion. So with that point made, I think we've got the active appropriations approved. The reserve allocations, we've got an outstanding question on. The item 5 was to finalize recommendations. I think we've effectively done that because we finalized our vote on the 7 applications. We've just got the reserve allocation discussions. Our item 6 for tonight is the draft warrant article. We did receive from Stuart Sagamore a proposed form of draft warrant article, which I believe said it was the recommended form from the Department of, Paul, was that it was the Department of Revenue?
I don't remember. Just, of course, my reaction was, let's keep doing it the way we've been doing it, because the town's used to that. The
town's used to it, and town council has looked at it for time immemorial, or at least 2003 or whenever we joined the CPA. And is there any other background you want to provide on that?
No, that's fine. Right. We'll check with town council on all of this and get his recommendation. And just, it's not called an undesignated reserve, it's called a budgeted reserve.
Okay. And so with respect to the draft warrant article, I was sort of hoping we could pull the lever on that tonight. I think we've got a couple of outstanding questions. Item 7 is public comments. We still have one member of the public here. Wendy, do you have any comments? I'm guessing you were here for this school related discussion.
No comment. It was covered. Thanks.
Keith is member of the public too, Burton.
Who's there?
Keith is also a member of the public.
Public, yeah, emeritus. Keith, any comments? Any further comments? Okay.
You may not be listening. I'm just going to say one thing about reserves. Ever since the CHA gave back $240,000, we have bounced this issue. Does it go into a specific housing reserve? And we really haven't decided this, and it's been 6 months or so.
I think we did have we did get at least, well, we got feedback from Ann via Stuart Sagamore that because it did not come out of a previously designated housing reserve, it came out of the general CPA fund, CPC funds, that it went back into the general CPC funds. Now, practically speaking, didn't really matter because we immediately put it back into the.
Yeah, we're
the
spending
housing
it,
trust
so
this
it won't be an issue, but we still, there's back and forth. I mean, when I first talked about it, when we went around and said, should it be in a reserve or not? I said, let's not put it in a reserve so we have the flexibility to do what we want with it. And
Yeah.
then everybody in the housing community yelled at me. And so we backed off because they didn't want to lose that money. So, I mean, it's an issue we need to resolve, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, practically speaking, I don't think it's really had an impact on it, and
No.
that are similar designations, because I think we consider each, we've never been in a situation, I don't think, where we are not able to meet for example, a housing need because we haven't had previously designated housing reserves. I think this is a benefit of roughly allocating things about 40 year to year, right? That's more or less, it's more or less not had an impact. Okay, I think the final item for our consideration this evening is the minutes of, and this is wonderful, these are our November 19th minutes. We are keeping on top of things. I think that our select board overseers would be pretty happy that we're keeping on top of things. Did anybody have any comments to the November 19th minutes?
I just want to clarify that these are the updated ones
Right,
that have
yes,
already
thank you.
been posted to the web. Yes.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you for your updates. Any comments? Okay, without, I would make a motion that we approve the minutes of November the 19th, 2024.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Eve. Paul, do you approve?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Eve?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Ed?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Sue?
Aye.
And I'm a yes. So we have approved the minutes. All right. Thank you all for your patience, for indulging my invitation.
Can I just make one comment before
Yes.
closing comment? So, yeah, in hindsight, one of our biggest problems was that we had too much money this year. We didn't have enough application, had too much money, which invited a lot of other stuff that we probably wouldn't have otherwise discussed. I think it behooves us kind of in the next CPC for us to do a little bit of marketing, a little bit of outreach, more so than we've done before. We've talked about that, but I think soliciting CPC applications in some way to make sure that we spend the money that we have, because we're getting additional tranche next year. And I know Keith is licking his chops sitting here thinking about that, but I think we should get 20 applications next year. Maybe the town knows about it, maybe you don't. I just want to leave us with that comment that I think we need to do some outreach.
And Paul, I totally agree, and I thank you for in years past writing the letter to the bridge or to its predecessor. The journal has tried to get some interest. What I think as you were saying the words, I think I need to make that point at town meeting, because all this, I think pretty much anybody that would have an application would be sitting in that gymnasium. And so I will definitely make that point that we were undersubscribed. And boy, I'll be glad I'm off the committee next year when you get 50 applications. Diane.
I just want to say that, Burton, you wrote a beautiful letter, actually, in the bridge that encouraged people to apply for funding.
Paul wrote that letter.
Oh, Paul wrote that. I thought you signed it. I'm sorry. I wonder why
Did I
you
sign it? I may have signed it, but Paul
yeah,
wrote
I thought
it.
you were thanking Paul for a different letter. I was thinking, I don't think I remember reading that letter from Paul. Yes, that very letter was a terrific letter. And I meant to write you and thank you. I think I did actually write you and thank you for it, because I thought it was terrific. And I think it's kind of notification which really matters. You can certainly say something at town meeting, and that's always advantageous, but I'm not sure I would make the easy assumption, and I don't mean that you're being easy, that everyone in town meeting who might want to apply is there.
Wow.
you know, so anyway, I think, but anyway, I thought that letter was superb.
And I want to give Burton credit. He inspired me. He was my
Okay.
inspiration.
Well, you know, inspiration and muscle, I thought it was really effective. So well done, guys.
Well, thanks. But again, Paul wrote the letter.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. It was a great letter, Burton. Thank you for signing.
Okay. Well, and thank you guys for your patience tonight. I know that this was a little bit of a, we spent about an hour talking with the school committee, the regional school committee. I thought it was very important, given, I think, the number of stakeholders in town and hearing from some of the committee members about the importance of the application, that we give it consideration, given some of the extraordinary circumstances, which were that we have this money, that we have people clamoring about cutting the school budgets because of the demands that they've been making lately, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for your taking the extra time.
It was painful to some of us because, you know, I think we all support the project and
yeah,
and we know what's going to happen in town meeting, you know, with this, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen in town meeting, but
I wish I could wave a wand and have made their application drop on September 9th or whatever our deadline was. But
Well,
it's just a month ago.
I
Yeah.
really respect the discussion, and I thought it was beautifully both managed by you, Burton, and by the group. I think we were able to cordially agree and disagree with each other, and I think that's what makes for good governments.
there we go.